Welcome to a Monday edition of Beyond the Arc. I'm your host, John Gonzalez, alongside our NBA insider, Bill Ryder, and somewhere in the studio, Ashley Nicole Moss. The gang's back together. Bill, you have mere moments until you have to hop on a plane to go to the draft combine in Chicago, right?
Yeah, heading to Chicago. Bronny James time, and I guess some other players maybe who might be drafted. Get to see them play, do some interviews, see all the GMs, see a bunch of colleagues. It's always a fun few days in the Windy City this time of year.
Ash, how was your weekend? Are you excited about the combine too?
My weekend was good. Mother's Day weekend wasn't great for me on Sunday, but we'll dive into that. In terms of the combine, I'm going to be very honest, and I'm going to say what you probably shouldn't say it on an NBA show. I don't really care. The draft doesn't excite me this year, but I'm happy for Bill because he gets to be there. So yay, Bill.
Bill will be there. Yay. We're going to get some on-the-ground reporting about Bronny and also about those Atlanta Hawks who beat long odds to get the top pick in the NBA draft. They're excited about it, although, as Ashley alluded to, the draft may be a little thinner this year than they would otherwise like, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And we're going to preview our two pivotal Game 4s this evening. But first, Pacers and Nuggets even up their series. As Ashley said, didn't go great for her Knicks this weekend. Pacers win games 3 and 4. Game 4 blowout. They win that one 121-89. It's the second biggest playoff victory for the Pacers ever. It's the fourth largest playoff loss for the Knicks ever. The last time the Knicks lost by more than 11 points this season was back in March 5. They've been rolling. Series is tied at 2-2. Tyrese Halliburton, we kind of, Bill, while you were out, we bagged on Tyrese Halliburton. After game 1, he only had 6 points on 6 shots. Since then, he's been excellent. He went for 35 in game 3. And then last night he had 26 and 5 in just 28 minutes in game 4. Ash, how you feeling?
Listen, as cliche as it's going to sound, I'm going to say it anyway. The series doesn't start until someone loses at home. Both these teams did what they were supposed to do. They defended home court. Now game 5 is where the real fun happens. Obviously, I feel like more of the pressures on the Knicks, it being in Madison Square Garden, you want to continue defending home court. Mathematically, you just have to win your 2 at home, although you don't really want to go to a game 7. Anything happens in a game 7. But both these teams did what they were supposed to do. Now, granted, if you're a Knicks fan like myself, you are concerned with the injuries piling up. You are concerned with Jalen Brunson. He did not play well in Indiana, 16 for 43. That's 37%. 2 for 11 from 3 in both Indiana games. And he's obviously dealing with some pain in his right foot or his left foot, I believe, that he's fighting through. But listen, it was a really bad game for the Knicks. Obviously a direct contrast to game 3, which was a lot closer, a lot more competitive. Obviously that game did not go the way of the Knicks, but at least you saw a team that was fighting through it. I'm hoping that 15 minutes of garbage time and the rest that it gave the guys will go ahead and give them some sort of momentum. I think the biggest thing for me, though, is when you look going into game 5, I know we keep talking about how thin the Knicks are, and they are. There's a lot of injuries, been a domino effect, but there are guys on the bench that I feel like Thibs has to go ahead and utilize to give even the smallest window of rest to Josh Hart, to Jalen Brunson. You have to find those moments where you can get them because they're going to be pivotal in their longevity for the remaining 3 games, if 3 games are necessary. So for game 5, that's the biggest thing that I want to see. I'm not worried about how they play. I think they turn that around. It's utilizing whatever is on the bench because there are people on the bench to go ahead and implement that to alleviate some of this pressure and some of these minutes that you're having these guys play.
It feels like a perfect storm hitting the New York Knicks, and some of it is self-inflicted because you got this Pacers team I know we've talked about that play at this frenetic pace of play where you want bodies to combat that. They've got multiple injuries. Obviously, OG is the critical guy that has to come back, but are they 26 and 5, John, when he's played for the Knicks? I think 13 and 16 when he hasn't played since he came over. But you also just got the wear and tear on this Knicks team and the minutes that, and this is always what Tom Thibodeau does, right? He piles the minutes. And Ash, I hear you on the rest, but let me just, I saw it last night when I was doing live HQ hits, and I went back this morning, and Aaron also texted me about it. So yeah, okay, Brunson only plays almost 31 minutes. He's 30 minutes, 44 seconds. DiVincenzo plays a little more than 32 minutes. Siakam, though, played 22. Turner played 26. Halliburton played less than 28. McConnell, I mean, not that he's a superstar, but has played really well, played 20.
He's been good.
But Pacers won this game, and they're the ones that got the rest, not the Knicks. And so for me, my worry for you, Ash, because you're the better, I still think you're the better basketball
the Knicks
team.
rest the whole fourth quarter.
Yeah, they did not rest. Brunson and DiVincenzo played more minutes, markedly more minutes than Siakam, than Halliburton. There was more rest to be had. If the Pacers can sit those guys in the 20s, so can Thibs. And so for me, John, my worry is the injuries are its own thing, but you got to play with what you got. You obviously need OG back. It doesn't sound like he'll be back in the next game, but just the pace the Pacers play at, the Pacers play at. And the fact that Brunson, as Ash talked about, has a banged up foot and that those Knicks looked exhausted, I'm worried that we might see the Knicks run out of gas over the next few games, even if they are, quote unquote, the better basketball team.
Banged up foot, and he rolled his ankle. And he hasn't here. In addition to all we've talked about Thibs, and we laugh about his rotations and how he'll play his guys 48 minutes if he can. But they're super thin right now. They haven't had a lot of rest. Josh Hart flat out said after the last game that he didn't have anything in that one, that he was tired. And then, he went 144 consecutive minutes before Thibs finally checked him out of game 3. That's a ton of minutes. And then here's the other thing that I would be super concerned about. Jalen Brunson, first 2 games, averaged 36 points per game on 56% shooting, a little bit over that, right? Looked awesome. Since then, they switched Naismith onto him. And he's been so, whatever you say about the Pacers defense, Naismith has been in Jalen Brunson's jersey the last 2 games. With him as the primary defender, Jalen Brunson has shot just 9 for 27 and a ton of shots off the front rim. He looked tired. He looks like he's slowed down by the foot and the ankle injury. And then on top of that, Naismith is giving him everything he can handle. I'd be worried about that if I was the Knicks, because you need Jalen Brunson to lead the way. And if he can't, then all of a sudden things get super dicey.
Look, I obviously don't want this to go to a game 7. I think that's problematic for the Knicks because of the injuries, because of the lack of bench. But I will say this, that I think that game 5, sleeping in your own bed makes a difference. I think that being home makes a difference. I keep saying the role players, whatever role players are left, that makes a difference at home. I just think that Indiana has not been good for the Knicks, but also look, at the end of the day, the Pacers did what they were supposed to do, and they defended home court. You're going back game 5, and this is where the series swings either in the direction of the Knicks still have a chance to fight, or it goes ahead and says that if the Knicks lose this game, I think the Pacers close it out in Indiana, which is what you don't want to do, is be in a closeout game, not at home. I think that the series doesn't start again until someone loses at home. Game 5 is the series changer. It's the momentum swinger. I think that the Knicks have all of the things necessary to get out of this series. But then when we talk about Eastern Conference Finals, I know we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but that's not going to be great down the road.
So I'm rooting for the Knicks, not for the reasons Ash you are, not out of any sort of emotional love. I want to go to New York City for the finals, and I think it'd be really cool. You know how that goes, John. You root for your own self-interest.
Bill?
Look, I spent a lot of time in Indianapolis at Super Bowls and Final Fours, and it's fine. The Skywalk's cool, and the JW Marriott downtown's amazing.
St. Elmo. And
St. Elmo's is fine. Give me some shrimp. Give me some steak.
Cocktail.
Almost got fired from the Kansas City Star for that expense report. Well, I'm not fired, but it's suspended. But I didn't know. I didn't spend that kind of money before. I have, from a non-emotional perspective and a non-fan perspective, I have real concerns about New York. Because you're right, Ash, the series doesn't start technically until somebody wins on the road. And now we go back to New York, but not a complete Knicks team. Obviously they're missing 4 critical guys. OG status is huge to what they do. Brunson, not his fault, looks like a shell of himself. And whether that is the switch that they've made defensively or just the fact that he's worn out, that foot. And then you're right, John, when he went up and down, and landed on, I can't remember who it was, when the guy stepped into basically his shooting zone, his landing zone, it all just, and then the fact that Thibs let these guys in when they were down almost 40 points late in the third quarter, and that playing 32 minutes in a blowout game is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. It is. I love Thibs. He's amazing, but it's coaching malpractice. You have to have the flexibility to know your guys are exhausted, to hear them in the press conference say they're exhausted, to see that Brunson looks like he's carrying 10-pound weights on his back while he's playing this Pacers team. And once the game is over, and once the opposing team, when Rick Carlisle starts resting your guys, do the same thing. The fact that those 2 dudes played in the 30 minutes, to me, is really worrisome, because the Pacers are going to keep running them and running them. We lost John. And running them. And Ash, my worry is that your Knicks, who I think are better than the Pacers, are gonna run out of steam.
So it's a little bit of a catch-22, right? I think on one side, I hear what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying. I think that most Knicks fans agree with what you're saying. But on the other side of that, you can't run there's only so much rest you can give them. You don't have anybody else. And it's like you don't your bag's not deep enough. It's deep enough to alleviate some of the pressure. It's deep enough to go ahead and say, all right, we're going to go ahead and give Precious some minutes to rest. Let's go ahead and bring Jericho Sims. They do the same thing. But when we're talking about resting a Jalen Brunson or a Josh Hart or a Dante DiVincenzo, and Dante's not even in the equation. Josh Hart and Jalen Brunson have the most miles on them this postseason, right? You can only rest them so much. Who was the second option? That's the issue here. Is not there's options, but there's not options for a quarter. There's not options for half a quarter. You have to bring those guys back in at some point, which is why I said for game 5, it's going to be pivotal in those stretches of time where the Knicks are either leading or, there's a moment where things are kind of stagnant. Give your guys rest in the little windows of opportunity you can give them because they're going to be far and in between, but they need them. It's pivotal for their longevity as this series continues.
Look, I'm with you. And I think in the totality of how Thibs runs his teams, this is part of the deal. Specifically in game 4, there was an opportunity to get these guys some extra rest. And I do want to just credit the Pacers. And I think the Pacers sense blood in the water. I think they can tell how exhausted the Knicks are because that level of defensive energy Indiana threw at New York, as good as we've talked about the Pacers defense being improved at the end of the regular season, they were on them. I mean, they looked like the Timberwolves over the course of that. It was incredible. And the way they played, and Halliburton is suddenly shooting the ball really well and is generating some offense he didn't earlier in the series. So credit the Pacers. They're also playing really, really well. I think it's just a perfect storm of bad timing and injuries and problems for that Knicks organization. John,
that yawn wasn't forced. That was a legitimate yawn from the inside of my soul because
I was gonna say something. Oh, I thought it was pretty interesting.
That was a legitimate yawn of how unconcerned I am with everything that you're saying when it comes to the Pacers.
I'm worried about the Knicks.
Not worried about that.
I would be a little. Here's one more thing, not to add on to the hey, what about this that should potentially concern the Knicks, but the Dante thing. He took a hit in game 3 at the end of game 3 in the fourth quarter. And since then, in the last 5 quarters, he's 3 of 17. Like he landed on his back kind of awkwardly. I don't know if he's right either. I mean, we keep talking about all these injuries piling up and all the minutes that they're playing. It's just something to think about. Game 5 on Tuesday at MSG. Knicks are favored in that, but for the series, the Pacers are a slight favorite to win the series. It's like basically a coin flip, but just like slightly favoring the Pacers. The good thing for the Knicks though is game 5 on Tuesday. If they can somehow win that, game 6 isn't until Thursday. They get 3 days off in between. 2 days off, and then the game actually happens because Caitlin Clark is making her Indiana debut on Thursday, so they can't play that game on Thursday like they normally would, but they get that extra day of rest. So
we'll see if the game's Friday. Yeah,
the game is on Friday. Yeah, so
That's
we'll see.
Something.
It's something they definitely need it. All right, let's talk about the other series that also got tied up. The Nuggets, even that series. Ashley had said that a series doesn't start until somebody wins on the road. This series doesn't start, I guess, until somebody wins at home. This is ridiculous. The Nuggets go to Minnesota and win 2 games in Minnesota, including game 4. That's tied up at 2-2. Joker's looked really good over the last couple, 35, 7, and 7. He had 16 in the fourth quarter. And here's the other thing. We don't really think about Joker as like a defender, like a monster defender, but he's been really active defensively over these last 2 games. Had a handful of steals and a block in game 4, had a handful of steals and a couple blocks in game 3.
Had a dunk.
He looked really good.
Had
a dunk, an amazing dunk.
Crazy dunk.
People were messing around with that on social media. And then Jamal Murray, who was an absolute no-show for the first 2 games, has reemerged. 19 and 8 assists in this last one on 17 shots, but still. And he was excellent in game 3, had 24 points, and he was super efficient.
Hit that half-court shot.
That
was a huge momentum shifter. Yeah.
Huge. So all of a sudden now, the Wolves went to their place and surprised them, and then they did not show up for these 2 games at home. This is really interesting.
This is why you can't. I get it when the team goes down 2-0 and everyone's it's over and it's done and all. There was Jokic slander that was out there. There was the Nuggets one hit, and it's just. And all 3 of us have covered these things long enough. These are long series, and especially when you've got Denver on one side and a young team like the Timberwolves on the other. These things can happen because what did Ant have? 44. I mean, he was amazing,
yeah, 44,
electric. And I think he was 5 of 8 from the 3-point line. And if you get into those, some of those threes were lasso threes where he's just trying to keep his team, like lasso Denver, don't let them run too far ahead. They were huge momentum threes. He got no help. Gobert was a bum. I mean, he was a bum. Cat was Cat, 5 of 18.
Gobert and Cat, I'm with you. I thought that they didn't give him a lot of help, but they both ended up with double doubles. Like on the stat sheet, you go, oh, that's okay. But in actual execution, you're right. Exactly.
Box scores, and I thought, look, it's not. I thought Gobert's defense, it wasn't a lack of effort, but guys kind of had their way with Gobert, from Jokic to other dudes. He didn't have the impact that he sometimes has. Cat, it's just, look, the Timberwolves can win the series, but they're probably not going to, and this is why you just can't get too carried away in these series because we've gotten to where we always were. Denver is a tougher, stronger team under duress, and the Timberwolves don't have enough offense outside of Anthony Edwards. And it looks like Cat is not capable of being that number 2 guy right now to carry your team or just add a little punch when they need him. Because if Cat makes 5 or 6 more of those 18 shots, if he goes 10 of 18 or 11 of 18, there's a world where the Timberwolves win that game. They're up 3-1, and they're probably going to win the series. But he has good moments in the limited big games he's had, but he has lots of games like he had yesterday too.
Yeah, I mean, Karl-Anthony Towns, Rudy Gobert were not great. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw the video of them like sliding into each other when Rudy Gobert went to go help Cat up off the floor. They just looked like Dumb and Dumber. It was embarrassing. Anthony Edwards, obviously the only guy who came to play, 44 points from him. But I think it's
Conley was okay.
Huh?
He was okay.
He was all out of like the big 3. Out of their core unit. It's interesting though, right? Rudy Gobert is like DPOY in the regular season, and then he like flips the switch when it comes to the playoffs, and he's just like, maybe I'll play, maybe I won't, depends on the day. But Aaron Gordon, like much credit to Aaron Gordon from Denver.
Yeah, he was good.
I mean, absolutely phenomenal. I mean, from the start, 10 for 10, mainly on those jumpers, which kind of made it hard for the Wolves to get in any momentum. And they also made them think twice about doubling Jokic because that guy was on fire. But the biggest thing that I took away from that, Jamal Murray obviously flipped the switch in both these Minnesota games. Whatever he was dealing with in Denver, he shut it off when he got to Minnesota. But the bench, we haven't really been talking much about Denver's bench because they've been kind of a non-factor. But in that game, 27 points from their bench, it kind of made you think, like, are the Nuggets a lot deeper than we've been giving them credit for throughout this series or maybe the postseason as a whole? Because they had a moment.
Well, they're probably playing way more Holiday minutes than they wanted to, would anticipate. Like that's kind of a little bit surprising, but yeah, I mean, we had talked about coming into the series that Minnesota had a deeper bench, and like Nickeil Alexander-Walker in that first two games where they were picking up Jamal Murray full court, he was awesome, and he was not yesterday. Yeah. So like, that's a problem for them. And you need Naz Reid to be better. Naz Reid's a 6th man of the year. You need him to be better. He wasn't. So all of a sudden now,
youth and experience thing, John, for me, right? Like, I
mentioned that
in the Thunder, right? I know that's a different show, but like it is a learning curve. And part of, I don't want to overstate the significance of the end of the first half, but when I was covering the beat in Miami, Eric Spoelstra would talk about winning the end of quarters. I'm not kidding, 100 times per scrum. I mean, it was just barreled into my brain, win the end of quarters. And that swing the Nuggets had at the end of the first half, where it went from, I think, a 7-point lead where they had got it down to 7, and it felt like Denver maybe was losing hold of it a little bit. And then all of a sudden it's 15. It ends with Murray hitting that crazy half-court shot, turnovers, and Ant got, I think, a 2-for-1, right? Like he set them up in a pretty good spot. That is a lack of experience. That is panicking, and you can panic as much at the end of a second quarter as you can a fourth quarter. And so for me, you're right, like Naz Reid, all these guys, I think it's hard to play at the level you need to in these sorts of series, especially against the defending champs. And for me, outside of Anthony Edwards, who's been the exception, every one of these guys on the Timberwolves have looked overmatched a little bit by the moment. Like that learning curve, I think, is still there.
It's interesting though, right? Because the harder thing is what the Timberwolves were able to do, it seemed like, with no problem, which is to go into Denver, home of the reigning champs, and defeat them not once, but twice. And they didn't just defeat them in like a close game. They defeated them and also like mentally abused them to the point their body language was just all over the place. You had Jamal Murray throwing heating packs on the floor at referees. So to see just a complete switch in both the Denver Nuggets, but also more so on the line of the Timberwolves, because I think that throughout the course of the series, like, you have bad games, and I kind of chalk that up to what the Nuggets were dealing with in those first two, although it was alarming. The Timberwolves just look like a drastically different team, and to be able to do that on the road, but not to do it at home is definitely like a huge question mark that I'm looking at it. Like, what the hell happened between game 2 and game 3?
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe they were feeling themselves a little bit, the Wolves were, and then the Nuggets, I think for me, I was really interested to see what kind of energy Joker was giving when he picked up his MVP award in the middle of the week, where he's had all this time to think about them losing those 2 games. And he wasn't down. He wasn't mopey. He was joking around with the guys. And I was like, oh, interesting. Like he looks like he's okay mentally. And then all of a sudden, like, we probably should have seen this coming. Like the Nuggets were never going to just get swept out by the Wolves. And now we got a real series. Game 5 on Tuesday in Denver. Nuggets are a 4.5-point favorite, and they're the favorites now to win the series, -170, Wolves +145. So yeah, we got a series. We'll see if the Wolves can climb back into it. Well, I mean, it's tied, but we'll see if they can answer. We'll put it that way. All right, we're going to take a quick break. And then on the other side, we're going to preview tonight's 2 games. And then we're also going to, on the back end, discuss the Atlanta Hawks winning the lottery. That's coming up next on Beyond the Arc.
There are some things in life that you can't quite explain.
An extraordinary story.
Maybe it sounds flawless, looks effortless, or makes you feel like a part of history.
The first ever goal for BFC.
And when all of those phenomenons come together, it's perfect. Pitch perfect.
All right, welcome back to Beyond the Arc on a Monday. John, Ashley, and Bill here. Check us out wherever you get your favorite podcast. Please download, subscribe, and leave a review. Start with OKC and the Mavs. Mavs are up 2-1 in that series. OKC has lost back-to-back games after starting the playoffs 5-0. Interesting here, I wanted to run this past you guys. Kyrie was really good in game 3. Luka was pretty good in game 3. For the series, though, they're averaging a combined around 40 points. During the regular season, they averaged around a combined 60 points. So OKC has really tried very hard and done pretty successfully to slow them down offensively. But as a consequence of this, PJ Washington has become the Josh Hart of that series. He just cannot miss a three-pointer. He made 7 of 11 threes in game 2. He had 27 points in game 3, made 5 of 12 in that. Jalen Williams and SGA were asked about him after game 3, and they both were just like kind of beside themselves. Like, well, look, this is our game plan. Our game plan is to slow down the 2 main guys. And like, what are we supposed to do when PJ Washington loses his mind? And now they've got a choice moving forward. Do they stick with the percentages where you're trying to slow down 2 guys who are really good and just hope that PJ Washington eventually reverts to the mean? Or do you now start helping on PJ Washington? It's an interesting conundrum for them.
It's interesting you bring up the 3, right? Because although PJ Washington's shooting well, looking at the numbers from game 3, the Mavs shot 33% from beyond the arc, right? And that's not a plug on the pod, by the way. It's just a coincidence. But it's actually below their regular season numbers. They shot them closer to 40% during the regular season. So at least in game 3, they weren't really as a team hitting those 3-pointers the way that they normally do. But I think that sometimes just happens. You live by the 3, you die by the 3. But it is interesting how the supporting cast has been key in a lot of these wins. And for me, that's the biggest thing. You know what Luka's going to bring. You know what Kyrie's going to bring. You know what they're going to bring together. But it's Derek Lively. It's PJ Washington. It's Daniel Gafford. It's Josh Green. It's all these guys doing the little things that, for me, has been the biggest game changer in this series and the swing in the Mavs' direction.
I think there's a couple other things that are noteworthy in connection, John, what you just laid out. And one is Kyrie Irving, hasn't been as statistically dominant, but he's also been sort of idling until they need him, which has mostly been the second half. And whenever that has happened, right, it's not like the games have largely gotten away from Dallas. It's been weird. He's just like clockwork, second half, fourth quarter takes over. And so, yes, not the same total of points, but I think the impact is similar. And part of the reason that's possible, and you're, I think, the first one that noted this and got into this stat that I keep using, that Dallas defense is the best in the NBA going back to March 7th or March 6th or whatever the date was that we sort of pegged when some of the rotations changed. The defense has been amazing. And I don't know how much of it is Dallas's defense versus, again, OKC's youth not really responding because outside of Shea, these guys have been largely underwhelming. The guys that are around it, like Chet has had some really off games.
Offensively. Horrible.
They all have. And like, again, this is why I told you guys, like, for me, I was a skeptic on both the Timberwolves and more the Thunder because they're young. It doesn't mean they can't turn around, win the game tonight, 2-2. Everything can change like it did for Denver. But John, I think you're right. Like the Luka Kyrie thing, and they're not scoring the same number of points is really interesting, but they haven't had to because they have been really good defensively at confounding a young team that hasn't responded the right way on their own offensive side of the ball.
By the way, just real quickly on Dallas's defense, you know who's been really good defensively in the playoffs so far? Kyrie Irving. Like shockingly good as the primary Luka as well, but as the primary defender this postseason, opponents are shooting 35% against Kyrie. He's actually trying. It's really amazing. I want to run one more thing past you guys before we move on to the other series for tonight. We have discussed this previously. I ran it past Colin Ward-Hedinger, who filled in for you guys on Friday, but I'm interested to see what you guys think. When you were talking about the supporting cast beyond SGA not being very good so far, the Josh Giddey problem has reared its head. We were prepped for it during the regular season, and now we're seeing it. He didn't start the second half of game 2. They ended up starting him in game 3, but he only played 13 minutes. They've started to go towards a combination of Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, and Kayson Wallace because Josh Giddey has been a super minus for them. And on court during this series, minus 28. Off court, plus 37. He's got one more year left on his rookie deal. I'm super interested to find out like what kind of second contract he gets, if he gets it with OKC or if they move him out. I don't know what they do with Josh Giddey because right now he is a massive negative for them.
I mean, guys do have bad postseasons, right? And then figure it out, especially young guys or people that have been in the playoffs. So I doubt there will be a severe overreaction to Giddey in the long term, John. That would be my guess, and I'll probably get more answers in Chicago because everyone's going to be there. But I'm with you that you have to have somebody else. You need a PJ Washington. You need somebody, especially if they're going to leave you open nonstop, to offer some offense. And he's been, I think, a prime example of many of these young guys I asked you. Just SGA doesn't have enough, and he's been pretty good. He just doesn't have enough help.
Hasn't been great. Game 4 tonight in Dallas. Mavs are 1.5-point favorites, and they're also the favorites to win the series. Other game tonight is Celtics and the Cavs. Celtics are up 2-1 in that one. Ash, you did mention that the Celtics love to mess around. The last 3 seasons, they are 14-14 at home. According to ESPN stats, that's the most playoff games over a 3-year span without a winning record at home. Now, they're still the heavy favorites to win the conference at minus 450. But I don't really love the energy from this team. Tatum was complaining the other day about how, hey, people call us a super team, but we don't have coach of the year. We don't have an MVP candidate. We only had 2 all-stars. Then he was saying, like, he's in a shooting slump. And he was saying, I'd love to make all of our shots. We were going to play the sound. We're going to skip the sound. He said he'd love to make all of his shots, but I don't know. I just feel like he's super complainy right now, and they don't look like they're at their best.
I think this Celtics team, you kind of just got to take him for how they are kind of thing, because they do this every single year in some way, shape, or form. They did it last series against Miami. Miami blew them out. And then game 3, what happens? They bounce back, win that series, shut them out in 5, right? I think that the Cavs have an opportunity to win another one, but this is just who the Celtics are. They play around with their food. They sometimes look a little bored on the court. And Jason Tatum, I mean, this series, he's been off for Jason Tatum standards, 41% overall, 22% on 3, but his overall production is almost a triple-double, 25 points, 10 rebounds, 8 assists. So we could be essentially nitpicking just because the standard is so high for Jason Tatum and the Boston Celtics, but this is just who they are. And I think that if you're going to go ahead and watch the Boston Celtics, whether or not you like the fact that they don't shut teams out when they're supposed to, they don't put series away when they're supposed to, they seem to always figure it out. I don't think the Cavs are going to upset them. They simply don't have enough. And even if they did, they're not consistent enough with what they do have. So, yeah, I mean, in hindsight, is that a great, DNA characteristic as a team to have when you're the drastically better team, but you don't always play like that? No. But if we're talking about, is that going to stop them from getting to the finals? Probably not. So I guess in that conversation, it doesn't really matter. So they are who they are, I guess.
I don't know. I'm not putting them in the finals just yet. Eastern Conference Finals, but I'll wait on that.
Yeah,
who's going to stop them to get to the finals?
I'm kind of with Ash, but they haven't been challenged. I mean, the fact is they lost a game to the Heat. Who cares? They lost a game to Cleveland. Who cares? They're probably not going to lose this game tonight. They're going to get to a conference finals, and maybe the Pacers challenge him, or maybe the Knicks challenge him. But there's a world where the Pacers are overmatched, or the Knicks are so banged up and exhausted because Thibs makes them play 48-minute full scrimmages on their days off, or whatever he does when we're not watching. That there's a world where the Celtics don't get challenged until the finals. And I'm with you, John. That you can't anoint them yet. They haven't actually been challenged. Teams lose games. Most teams don't go 6-0. Well, they're also not playing particularly dynamic and balanced basketball.
They are not.
You see it sometimes. Like, this is a team that was number 1 in the Eastern Conference relatively the entire year. Obviously, 1, 2, and 3 kind of moved around very slightly. But, I mean, they've been running the Eastern Conference the entire year. The only team that kind of gave them a challenge was Miami in that one game. Like, they're on cruise control right now, and we may dislike it because you know how well this team can be, and you would think there should be an urgency to put teams away and kind of get rest where you can get it. But sometimes they just simply look bored. Like, you would be bored too if you knew you were going into a game and 9 times out of 10 you were going to win it. Like, it's kind of what I see when I look at them play.
Not a lot of competition from the Cavs aside from Donovan Mitchell. Evan Mobley's been okay. Everybody else has been pretty awful, though. Tonight, Jarrett Allen is questionable. That's a positive for the Cavaliers. He's been out with a rib for a while, but he's questionable. Less good for the Cavs. Donovan Mitchell also questionable with a calf. Celtics are 8.5-point favorites. We'll see what happens in that one. All right, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to discuss a surprisingly interesting lottery that happened on a Sunday. That's coming up next on Beyond the Arc.
2 big boys getting ready to play. Big being the operative word here. And here they come.
Welcome back to Beyond the Arc. John, Ashley, and Bill wrapping up on Monday edition. Lottery was yesterday. The Atlanta Hawks, who were 36-46 and in the play-in, ended up winning the lottery yesterday. They had just a 3% chance at the top pick. They moved up 9 spots. Womp womp on the Pistons. They fall down. It's the first number 1 pick for the Hawks since 1975. Only 4 lottery winners in history have had worse odds than the Hawks did to do it. Now, this makes it very interesting because we always knew that the Hawks were headed for like a really pivotal offseason. And Landry Fields has some work to do, especially because at present, they're about $400,000 from hitting the tax threshold. And that's only for 12 players, including the first round pick. And the first round pick now has a $12.5 million cap hold, which is about $7 million more than the 10th pick would have been. So it's like, oh, yay, we got the first pick. And then it's like, oh, no, our roster is a disaster. What are we going to do here? So
the draft's not that impressive. So, like, you got the number 1 pick in a draft that's like,
it's not certain. There'll be some guys. There's no. It's like
what do you do? Get Bronny James.
This is the thing that's brutal for Detroit. Is if you go 2 or 3, there's a world where you can actually get the right guy because there are 2 or 3 or 4 people that people aren't sure. It's not like where you draft number 1 and there's right. And then but at
there'll 5, be somebody who's good, but you don't know who it's going to be.
Right. Now, I haven't talked to anyone in Atlanta. I'm going to try to do that while I'm in Chicago. But, John, I have talked to a few other folks around the league. And as you are hinting toward, the strong expectation is that Trae Young is gone and that they are going to move on from him. And as I understand it, Quinn Snyder was already over Trae. And there was a sense, not a decided sense, but some movement toward the notion that Trae wasn't a fit. And this just gives them a very easy excuse and reason and valid reason to just reset. Whether it's the kid from France, Alex Sarr, whoever else you want to point to, just move on from Trae, get what you can, do a reset, build this team in Quinn Snyder's image. And you knew it because Landry Fields looked like he had won the lottery, but the giddiness, I'm not getting fired, like look on his face.
I just want to go on record and say the lottery is rigged because you know how many years the Knicks were horrible and we never went ahead and got a number 1 draft pick in the lottery?
But that's why it's not rigged.
Do you know how many
they
years
want the Knicks to be good?
20 games a season, and for
they want the Knicks to be good.
Some way, shape, or form, we always got screwed in the lottery. I'm not saying it's rigged.
New York City.
It doesn't matter, Bill.
Fix it for you.
Of the worst team, and for some reason, a playing team just landed the number 1. I'm saying
You got Patrick Ewing through a cold envelope.
Yeah.
What year
The
was
original
Come on.
1985. The original
Okay.
conspiracy theory was that the Knicks got the lottery rigged for them with the frozen envelope.
It
But
was
okay.
1985. It is
All right, let's bring it back to the Hawks for just a quick second here, because this makes it really interesting for them. As Bill mentioned, they've got to decide between Trey and DeJounte, and it looks like it's going to be Trey on his way out, and they're going to keep DeJounte. But then beyond that, for roster building purposes, as I mentioned, that roster is way too expensive for a team that won 36 games. So, you got one more year of Capella left at $22 million. They'd love to get off of his money. It's going to be interesting to see what they do about Sadiq Bey too. He has an ACL injury. He didn't sign that extension. He's owed, like maybe they just renounce his rights. That would be kind of crazy, but otherwise you got to give him a new deal, or maybe they move the first pick. Maybe they move back. Maybe they package it with something in a deal for a star. Like there's a lot of different options. The Hawks at the trade deadline were one of the most interesting teams. They ended up doing really nothing, which is fascinating. But now this offseason, like the NBA universe, all of this different team building that's going to happen in the NBA, the starting point, ground zero, is going to be somehow in Atlanta.
I think they're keeping I don't know. I'll try to find out. I think they're keeping the pick.
Find out.
I think they're rebuilding. I think because Quinn Snyder did a really nice job when he was in Utah at working with young players and building what he wanted and helping guys to really get to, like, that's what he wants. He wants a team that he can mold and a team that he can craft. And it's just, and I feel so bad for Detroit. I mean, it is so brutal. Because this happened to him last year. This happened last year too.
Yeah, they did get Cade Cunningham though. I mean, come on, like they got one. They got one. So they're not Ashley's poor put upon Knicks that never get anything called in their favor.
Ashley,
well,
small markets like New York, it's always an uphill battle. Small markets like New York City.
I mean, it's really remarkable that they ended up with the top pick, like given the percentages. And, we should mention the other teams here. The Wizards end up at 2. The Rockets end up at 3. The Spurs have 2 picks in the top 8 that could be
8, right?
And so we're talking about the Hawks and maybe like moving on from Trae Young. One of the hot rumors has been potentially Trae Young to the Spurs. And not only do the Spurs have 2 picks in the top 8, which by the way, I don't like that fit. I know a lot of people do. I don't want Trae Young anywhere near Victor Wembanyama.
I agree.
But there are a lot of people who do, and they have those 2 picks in the top 8. And on top of that, they also control the Hawks draft for the next 3 years. They've got 2 picks and a pick swap. So like maybe Atlanta could recoup some of that.
So some of it. You trade for DeJounte Murray and you're going to send back Trae Young for less. It's brutal.
Brutal. It's brutal.
Was that, I can't remember. Was that Schlenk or was that Fields? That was Schlenk.
It might have been Schlenk. I'd have to go back and look at it. It's Schlenk.
Who now is like works for the Wizards, who will now have a say in the Wizards drafting it too. What a business.
Ash, anything else jump out from the Lotto for you?
Nope. I have my own problems.
All right. All right. Well, we'll see what the Atlanta Hawks do this offseason. It's going to be very, very interesting. We're going to keep an eye on that. Also, a 2-night draft. How do we feel about a 2-night draft in the NBA? The NFL does it. You don't like it.
It's
not going to work, but go for it.
A 2-night draft in the NBA, especially this year, is kind of insane.
You're just like randos in the second round that nobody has ever heard of.
Like, that's where Bronny might get drafted. So people are going to be like,
I'm not against a 2-night draft on maybe the years where it's a little bit more of a stacked draft class and there's a lot of hoopla surrounding it and there's a lot of questions like late. But I feel like that should be a special occasion, not the norm. And if they're trying to make this the norm, I just don't see how that works.
But I would say this, Ash, this is the year with Bronny because he'll probably go in the second round and people are going to wait with bated breath for that to happen.
I mean, we could have just got the notification on our phone. We don't got to sit there and wait for it. You know what I mean? Like, I just no shade.
Right.
I hope. God bless Bronny. God bless.
We're waiting on that Bronny push notification. Bill's got to run off to the airport. That's going to do it for us today. Tomorrow, by the way, we are back on CBS Sports Network at 2 p.m. Eastern. Don't miss that. For now, though, for Ashley and Bill, I'm John Gonzalez. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow.